Hello, Kathy. This is Control Room. I can hear you, and I've got you coming in very low.
Okay. Do you have an email or a Twitter? Who is the congressman? O'Rourke? BETO?
We are live on the web stream, so if I put his picture
Yeah.
on that screen, everybody on the web stream will see him.
Is there a 16th?
Yeah? All right.
Sure.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to the National Press Club. I'm Andrea Edney. I'm an editor at Bloomberg News, and I am the 111th president of the National Press Club, the world's leading professional organization for journalists. This is my first public act as president of the National Press Club, to be here with all of you and to call for the release of Mexican journalist Emilio Gutierrez, an asylum seeker who is currently being held, along with his son Oscar, at the El Paso Detention Center run by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Today, we want to update you on where things stand with Emilio's case since our last news conference on this topic on December 11th. For those of you on the webcast, if you have questions, we will be taking questions at the end of my presentation. If you have questions, or at the end of our presentation, if you have questions, please email them to Underwood, that's LUNDERWOOD, @press.org. So, much has happened in terms of Emilio's legal situation, the public interest, and media interest. For example, Emilio won a stay of his deportation, and we've gathered 95,000 signatures on a petition to free him. However, we are still in the same place with many things. ICE is holding Emilio, the recipient of the National Press Club's John Aubuchon Award in October 2017. They are holding a man with no criminal record. They are holding a man who presents no danger to the community, indeed, who lived peacefully in the U.S. for 9 years while his petition worked through the legal system. They are holding a man who is waiting for his asylum case to be adjudicated. Both the Washington Post and the Houston Chronicle have called for asylum for Emilio. Recently, the El Paso bishop, Mark Seitz, called for asylum for Emilio. And the congressman from El Paso, Beto O'Rourke, has also called for asylum for Emilio. And today, in my first public act as president of the National Press Club, I am calling for Emilio to be released and granted asylum. As the president of the National Press Club, I represent 3,000 members. And I promise them and all who are listening here on the webcast today that under my presidency, this case will continue to be a top priority for the National Press Club. Emilio has been held since December 7th. Why is he being punished? He's committed no crime. He was a journalist who was chased from his native country because of his writing about the Mexican military. He asked for asylum in our country, a country where we are proud of our ability to grant asylum. He followed the process. Now, as his attorney prepares his appeal to the Bureau of Immigration Appeals, he must seek permission to see his client and pass through checkpoints and other hurdles. So at this time, we ask ICE to release Emilio so that he can help his attorney prepare his appeal. ICE had said in the past that they believe that Emilio is a flight risk. Where would he go? He doesn't have a passport. He would be on an ankle bracelet so that they can monitor his location constantly. He has every reason to want his appeal to be heard, yet he remains in what looks like a prison. Can we please put up a photo of the El Paso Detention Center?
Do you have that?
Do we have a photo?
Okay.
So for anyone who has not seen the El Paso Detention Center, I haven't seen it in person. It looks like a prison. So he is being held at a cost to taxpayers, by the way, of $127 a day. Those are the Department of Homeland Security statistics and estimates, not ours. $127 a day to hold this man in detention. So today, we will hear from Emilio's attorney, who will join us by phone from El Paso. We are also going to hear from Kathy Kiley, who, as the Press Freedom Fellow for the National Press Club Journalism Institute, has done work on this case. She is joining us by phone from New Hampshire, and we also have with us Bill McCarran, who is here as Press Club Executive Director and who recently visited El Paso to meet with Emilio in detention and to meet with ICE officials, along with Eddie Beckett and Congressman O'Rourke. So let's start with Kathy, if she's ready, please. Kathy, could you please give us a timeline on what has happened in Emilio's case since our last news conference?
Good afternoon, Andrea, and everybody at the National Press Club. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Hi,
Okay,
Kathy.
Great. I'm speaking to you from the campus of the University of Snowy, New Hampshire, where I now teach journalism. And this is the kind of lesson that we want students to focus on. We want our future students, our future journalists, to understand that freedom of the press is alive and well in the United States, and we certainly think that one way to prove that is to provide asylum for truth tellers. I am, as Andrea said, the Press Freedom Fellow for the club's Journalism Institute, our nonprofit wing, and it is in that capacity that I started working on this case last fall when we found out that Emilio Gutierrez, just weeks after accepting our club's Press Freedom Award, was in danger of being deported. Now, Emilio has been behind bars for 7 weeks, 43 days to be exact. And while we are really heartened by the support we've received for our Change.org petition, Free Emilio, and the support we've received from dozens of other press organizations and freedom of the press groups, some of whom I believe might be in the audience today, we are concerned. We are pleased that the Bureau of Immigration Appeals has agreed to reconsider Emilio's asylum request, which was denied after he had been living here for 9 years, as Andrea said, last summer by a judge in El Paso. Now, the Bureau of Immigration Appeals has agreed to reconsider that asylum request, but we don't know how long that will take. The attorneys in this case haven't even gotten filing deadlines yet. Keeping Emilio in jail while we wait seems to us cruel and unusual and undeserved punishment. It is, as Andrea pointed out, not so incidentally, also costly to the taxpayers. That $127 a day we're paying to keep Emilio behind bars, I priced it out, and you can get a hotel room in El Paso for less, a lot less. More to the point, we're paying this money to detain a man who is not a criminal. Emilio did not come here illegally. He presented himself at a New Mexico port of entry in 2008 and sought asylum because, as you heard, his reporting on official corruption in his country put him on a hit list. Public officials, church officials, press organizations are all calling for the release of Emilio Gutierrez. Yet our government remains obdurate. Why? The latest rationale comes in the form of a letter, which we are making available to all of you, from Immigrations and Customs Enforcement to Congressman Beto O'Rourke. I say latest rationale because in the months that I've been working on this case for the National Press Club Journalism Institute, the agency's story has kept changing. First, as you heard, ICE claimed Emilio was a flight risk. This despite the fact that he lived 9 years in the United States while awaiting action on his case and made regular immigration check-ins. Then, the agency told Congressman O'Rourke that Emilio wasn't a journalist. This despite widespread support for his case from some of the world's leading press organizations, including the one that is hosting this press conference. Now, in this letter, ICE accuses Emilio of immigration fraud, a charge based on an encounter he had with Customs and Border Protection nearly 2 decades ago. One he told ICE about when he requested asylum, and one that, by the way, did not end in him being accused of fraud. Until now. Emilio's attorney, Eduardo Beckett, will have more to say about the dubious nature of this allegation later. In the meantime, I'd like to respond to a couple of points in the ICE letter. Careful readers might notice an uncharacteristically snarky phrase in this otherwise bureaucratic communique. Oddly, the letter says, referring to the alleged border violation, this incident never turns up in press accounts. The implication that we are omitting information is false and outrageous. I am first and foremost a reporter, so when we found out that our National Press Club Freedom of the Press Award winner had been taken into custody, the very first thing I did was to call ICE for its side of the story. Was there something we're not getting here? I asked officials whom I reached. In the weeks since, I have had multiple phone and email exchanges with representatives of ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. We have pressed the agency repeatedly to justify its actions, and we even filed privacy waivers which would allow ICE to expound upon the case. Yet we heard nothing about this supposedly damning piece of information. In fact, we still have heard nothing about it from ICE. The only way it has come to our attention is through the letter that Congressman O'Rourke shared with us and that we are now sharing with you. Which leads me to wonder, if this is really such a big deal, why has it never come up in nearly 10 years of litigation over Emilio's case? Why was it only when a member of Congress began to ask questions that ICE chose to bring this up? It feels like ex post facto rationalization. Moreover, what relevance does something that happened 20 years ago have to today's case? The key facts in this case are of much more recent vintage. Number one, Emilio was a journalist in Mexico. Number two, his reporting on official corruption made him a target. Number three, since he applied for asylum in the United States, Mexico has become more, not less dangerous for reporters. So I ask again, what are we missing here? And I hope we get an answer. I'm going to turn this back at the moment to Andrea, and you can, I don't know if Eddie is next, but maybe you can
Yes.
let us know who comes next in the program. And I am still here and available for questions if anyone has them later.
Kathy, thank you so much. Thank you. We are going to go next to the Bishop of El Paso. We'll come to Eddie in a little bit. We're going to go to the Bishop of El Paso, Mark Seitz, who is on the phone.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Mark.
Hello.
Hi, Bishop. Sorry. Hello, Bishop Seitz. Thank you for joining us. Please, go ahead.
Well, I had the opportunity to meet Emilio and his son about a week and a half ago at the detention center. Had the opportunity to speak with them and then with the press afterwards. I think what you want to hear mostly from me is just a moral perspective on this situation, and I'd be happy to go into any other details about my meeting with him. But, you know, to me it just seems very odd that this nation that has really helped write laws for asylum and held other nations to task on respecting those laws, accepting people who were running for their lives from oppression. Now we find ourselves in the position of trying to find every way we can not to respect those laws. You know, for decades, we were mortified as Americans to hear about nations that would apply a capital penalty to someone who had attempted to leave their country. I'm talking about Eastern Europe. And now it seems that we've, in a certain way, applied a capital penalty to people who would try to enter our country and sought asylum. We've made it almost impossible for people who are under threat of death to be able to remain here, and we treat them as though they're criminals. The treatment of people in the detention center, especially when you consider that they've been convicted of no crimes, is it should be mortifying to any American to think that people who are innocent of any criminal wrongdoing, but in the case of Emilio, simply stood up and spoke the truth, should just really concern every American who believes in justice, in democracy, in freedom of speech, freedom of the press. It really goes contrary to some of our most fundamental American values.
Bishop Seitz, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Bishop, it's Bill McCarron. How are you?
I'm fine, but I'm not hearing you very well.
Okay. How's this?
Yeah,
better?
that's better.
Can you tell us, Bishop, how was Emilio when you met with him in spirit and in health?
Very frustrated, I would say, is probably a good word for it. Just, so and discouraged, living in that dehumanizing situation day to day and seeing every possible avenue of relief taken away. I think any of us can imagine he's, undergone a hunger strike. He's tried everything he could think of to simply do what he can do, but it's extremely frustrating, and it must be even more so just knowing that his 25-year-old son is going through the same thing with him. So very frustrated. I hope that I was able to bring him some spiritual comfort, and we had the opportunity to speak about that and also to pray together. I think that's one of the things that is sustaining him now.
Bishop, thank you so much for your strong support in this case and for everything you're doing for Emilio. We'll remain in touch with you, and we're grateful for your effort and for your energy in this case and for what you do for people in El Paso.
You're most welcome. I'm glad to be able to contribute in whatever small way I can. I will be having to return to a meeting, so if there are not any other questions, I'll do that.
Do we have questions for the bishop from the floor? Looks like they may send you to your meeting, but
Okay.
but they're all. Oh, so we have a question. Sorry.
Yes. How does a citizen write Emilio, and where does he pick up his mail?
So I think you'd have to. Unless the bishop knows. I would say you have to write through Eduardo Beckett, his attorney. And
That sounds like good advice.
Beckett would bring him the letter.
Yes, Eduardo visits him every week.
Yeah. We got one more question.
For the bishop.
How often does he get to see his attorney, and is there no direct address we can write him to?
Yes, his attorney has taken a very personal interest in this matter, and I think that goes well beyond his, basic task. So he visits him at least once a week at the detention center, and I think it's good advice that if you wanted to get a letter to him, Eduardo Beckett would certainly be able to. He would know how to do that.
And he is going to be addressing this press conference shortly as well, so we can take more questions for his attorney, for Eddie Beckett, shortly. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to make sure people know that we went to El Paso December 22nd, and we had a lot of things to do that day. I was with Eddie Beckett, who we're going to hear from in a minute. But the bishop agreed to see us on December 22nd, which is high season. It's the Friday before, the weekend before Christmas. Yeah. And we were just, we met heroes in El Paso, and Bishop Seitz is one of those heroes. And I just want to call him out and thank him for the Christmas spirit.
Kind of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's an honor.
Thank you, Bishop.
All right. God bless you all. Thank you for your work.
God bless you.
Thank you, Bishop Seitz.
Bye.
Now, I think, is Eddie?
Yeah.
Now I think we want to go to Eddie, his attorney, to see where the case stands legally, and to say what he has to say about these recent new allegations by ICE in their letter to Congressman O'Rourke. Eddie, do we have you on the line?
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, Eddie.
Hello.
Please go ahead.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Ed Beckett. It is my professional opinion that these are one of the tactics that ICE uses. They try to find any insignificant small thing and turn it into a big thing. In fact, this expedited removal order incident from 1999 has always been part of the record. This was filed by the ICE attorneys back in 2010. So this is nothing new or secret or something that we're shocked at. It's always been part of the record. However, during the removal proceedings before the immigration judge, it was never brought up, even though they were part of the record. During cross-examination, when Emilio was testifying, the government never asked him a question based on this 1999 incident. The government never, brought, nor did the judge. So to me, it's alarming that, all of a sudden, when they run out of excuses to release him, they bring it up. And then on the legal standpoint, this report is not reliable. First of all, this is a Customs and Border Protection officer who I have the most respect for, right? They're guarding our ports of entries, and they're trying to do their job. However, in cases, as in Emilio's case, they are the investigator. They have like three roles, which is not justifiable. They become the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury all at the same time. And this report was done in English. So this is an encounter that back in 1999, Emilio Gutierrez Soto had a border crossing card, which is a non-immigrant visa, that thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of people along the border from Mexico have them. And basically, you apply for it, through the U.S. consulate in Ciudad Juarez for the most part. And once they grant you this, you can come and visit on a daily basis. You can stay here up to 30 days without violating the law. A lot of people use it. You can use it for pleasure or for business. And here on the border, people come and shop, do their Christmas shopping. They come visit their relatives. They stay, up to 30 days. They go back. So this is what Emilio was doing back in 1999. He's living in Ciudad Juarez, and he's visiting his extended relatives in El Paso, Texas. One day he's crossing the port of entry, and the CBP officer questions him and says, where are you going? What's going on with you? He responds. He was truthful. Then the officer says, you know what, I have a hunch that you're living here in the U.S. And Emilio says, oh, well, I don't live here. I live in Ciudad Juarez. He goes, yeah, but I believe that you do. And that was basically the encounter. So then they move him to secondary, and CBP basically arrests my client, Emilio Gutierrez Soto, puts him in a cell for over 24 hours, and basically forces him to sign kind of like a confession, saying that he does, in fact, live in the U.S. when he did not. And then they deport him. They take away his border crossing card, and then they execute a deportation order. And I talked to Emilio on this, and he tells me, I've never lived in the U.S. I had no intent to live in the U.S. but I would come and visit my extended family. I would do little odd jobs and household chores for them, and I told the officer that. I was very truthful. When he told me to sign the paperwork, it was all in English. I didn't understand what I was signing, so he just signed. And so now they're trying to use that to allege that somehow that's fraud. The officer who deported him never charged him or checked off the box because, the forms have a bunch of little sections of the law. They only checked off the box that says you violated the terms of your visa. Of course, we're challenging that. We're saying, how can you use a document, that happened almost 20 years ago without having the maker present before a court for cross-examination? The reliability of this document is highly questionable.
Yep.
It wasn't done in a fair manner. It wasn't done in the Spanish language. Therefore, legally speaking, this document would be probably inadmissible, or at least it would be given very little weight in a court of law. And I believe that's why the ICE never brought it up.
Eddie, I wanted to make sure people get this point. So what you're saying is on that form, there's a box, and the agent can check off that he believes fraud has occurred in the case. And in Emilio's case, the agent didn't check that box, so didn't make an action to say he thought fraud was happening. Correct. But in ICE's current letter to Congressman O'Rourke, they're claiming that the reason that he can't be given humanitarian parole is because of his past history of fraud.
Correct.
Okay.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's what's shocking to me. That there's no basis for this. This is just a tactic on the behalf of ICE to keep Emilio Gutierrez Soto detained, break his spirit, and pressure him so he can give up his claim. That's really what they want. And then also to make him look bad in front of the congressman. So I'm preparing a letter that I was supposed to have it out this morning, but I'm working on it, and I'll be more than happy to send it to anyone that wants a copy of it, where we respond to these allegations by the ICE director of El Paso.
Okay, hey, that's cool. One thing we wanted to mention is that you mentioned a letter to that you're going to write, and I don't know if you know this, but we have a letter or a statement, I guess it is, from Congressman O'Rourke responding to that letter. So we didn't know we were going to have this, but it came through right before we started the event today. So Andrea's going to read it. Do we have can we put up a picture of Congressman O'Rourke so they can see who he is? Before you go there, what I want to say, I said we met heroes in El Paso. So the bishop was one, and Congressman O'Rourke was one. The morning of December 22nd, first time I've ever seen him. I live in Washington, he lives in Washington, we never see each other. I saw him at ICE detention in front of a bunch of razor wire and ugly walls and people with guns. That's where he was with me December 22nd, and if we were right-thinking people, we would have been at a Christmas party or starting our time with our families. But this is a stand-up guy that shows up Christmas, right before Christmas, going into a prison. Nobody wants to be there. So I was grateful for his time and his staff's time and for this statement he gave us today.
So the statement from Representative O'Rourke that I'm going to read is as follows. I am disappointed with the decision to refuse Emilio's request for humanitarian parole. It is disheartening that ICE has decided to continue detaining Emilio and his son, neither of whom pose any kind of threat to this country. It's important to clarify, given statements from the president, that the press are not the enemy of the people. They are our best defense against tyranny, and they have an essential role to play in our democracy and throughout the world. Mexico is the most dangerous place to be a journalist in this hemisphere. Emilio's government cannot protect him. We have an opportunity and a responsibility to do that. I remain confident and hopeful that the Board of Immigration Appeals will rule favorably based on the merits of Emilio's case. And now, that is Congressman O'Rourke's statement, yes.
Yeah, let's see if we jump that into Eddie's time. So Eddie, do you have more you want to say?
I would just also say that, in looking at the letter and responding, there is the executive order that the ICE director refers to, which is the Executive Order 13768. And I would say that executive order that went into effect this year, actually I think last year, basically says that asylum seekers should not be granted humanitarian parole if they are removable non-citizens. In this case, Emilio's case is pending, so he is not in that category. He cannot be removed legally speaking because his case is pending before the Board of Immigration Appeals. He's not a danger to the community. He doesn't present a flight risk, and there are no foreign policy considerations to continue the indefinite detention of him. So I would say that this executive order is being violated by ICE because it only talks about removable non-citizens, and Emilio is not removable. And then it also says that, the law hasn't changed or the policy hasn't changed. They're just saying we need to apply the law to people that deserve this. Well, in this case, Emilio, there's a significant public benefit to release him. And so the executive order talks about that, and in this case, it's clearly he qualifies both on humanitarian reason and as a significant public benefit. And so that's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, let's talk about that. What we think the significant public benefit is, among other things, is the First Amendment in our country is freedom of expression and freedom of the press. And so there is a salutary effect if the government of the United States acknowledges the importance of journalism and the risks that journalists face. And if Emilio is released to the community, that is a way of saying that the risk that is potential for a journalist of courage that's written about issues of corruption in Mexico, putting his own life at risk, that our country believes that that person should be protected. And I think we think, the Press Club thinks, that's a valuable public discussion point, and that is a value to the community to have him released in this way, other than the fact that you don't have to pay the cost to have him in ICE detention. He's a productive citizen. He and his son work. They run a food truck. The son is going to school and also working. Let him back out. And Eddie, isn't it the case that the week before we got there, that there were as many as 30 people were released from this detention facility because it's overcrowded and it's a growth business. They're picking up people all the time. And look, some people do probably belong being held, but we got people out on the street that they're trying to bring in. 30 were released to make space. It's not like there's tons of room in there. He doesn't need to be in there. He's not a criminal. He's not a risk to anybody. Isn't that do you remember it that way?
Absolutely correct. On that week that Bill McCarran was down here, ICE was releasing people left and right, and we were all shocked because some of the people didn't even qualify for a bond. They had no community ties. They had been denied bonds. They had been denied paroles numerous times, and all of a sudden, just with the stroke of a pen, they were letting out 30, 40 people based on the basis that there was no room, and that also correlates that when Emilio was taken into custody, instead of taking him to the El Paso Detention Center, they took him to West Texas, which is 90 miles away from here. And I'm going to assume, that presumptively that there was no room for him. And so at that point, they could have easily released him, but they chose not to. And this just shows how ICE operates, that they have lost their soul, they have lost their humanity, and that's why we need to pressure them to get him released.
Yeah, I don't know we're going to sign on to lost their soul, but it is interesting to me that the bishop comes out of the lockup and he walks up to the press, and the first thing he says is it's morally wrong for him to be in there. Okay, Eddie can talk a lot about legal issues, and we're talking about press issues and the risk to journalists, but the Bishop of El Paso has pretty good standing with respect to what's moral and what isn't moral, and I would listen to him on that topic before I would listen to ICE on that topic. But what did we want to do now?
Did you have more? Would you like to address the pattern of behavior
I
that you
would.
see by ICE?
Yeah, I would. And I'll go this one.
Yeah.
And Eddie, feel free to jump in on this too. So, and Kathy, to you too. Kathy touched on the fact that ICE, in their recent letter to Congressman O'Rourke, said, well, you know, this parking ticket thing we think we have on Emilio over here, a 19-year-old thing.
Yeah.
You never hear about that from the press. By the way, when they sent this letter, they sent it just to the congressman, so they didn't send it to us. You know, we're the press, right? So now you're complaining that you never hear about this from the press, but you didn't send the letter to us. I noticed that. We got it from the congressman. But it's a sharp-elbowed comment in a government document. As a citizen, and you all are citizens, you know, I think I would prefer that a government document not be prepared with a shot at the press, right? I mean, free speech. They can say or do whatever they want to do, but I understand that they work in a country, you know, and for a government that's run by a constitution that has something to say about the importance of freedom of the press. So how about not taking your shots at people whose way of approaching public discourse is protected by the Constitution, right? That's a good place to start. But Andre asked me to talk about pattern, and I think there's a pattern here for the way ICE has acted toward the press, toward us on this issue. So the rule to go into the lockup and see the prisoner is that you have to get the prisoner to write that you can go in, fill out a form and sign. And then you have to get the prisoner's attorney to fill out a form and sign. And when we knew we were going down there, we did both those things. And so I'm getting ready to go the afternoon before. I get a call from William Joyce's William Joyce's secretary saying, in this case, William Joyce is the acting field director for ICE, which means he has more people with guns working for him than most people that run sovereign nations. He's a warlord on the border there. And so he says, his secretary says, I have to write a declarative letter saying I want to go into the lockup. Well, of course I want to go into lockup. That's why Eduardo wrote a letter and Emilio signed a form. Yeah, I want to go in, but okay, belt and suspenders. So I write a letter and send it to her, and she had me fax. What is a fax? I had to go find a fax. And it shows the fax went through. So I said, email, please confirm you got that. I don't hear anything from her. I'm on a plane. I get there. The first thing, I get to El Paso about 7 o'clock. First thing I get is an email from this same lady saying, oh, Director Joyce has been out all day. He has not been able to read your letter, so we are not going to be able to let you into the lockup to see Emilio. And okay, so it's, she says, I'm fighting with her a little bit, and she says, well, maybe we can let you in after 1 o'clock. So we had already announced that we're having a news conference at 1 o'clock, right? So they don't want us to have this news conference, right? And they're trying to delay us going to the news conference and saying, we saw the guy. This is what he, this is what he said. So I don't know, I'm just that way. So I just went, the next day, and I was really glad to see, Emilio. But I was glad to see Congressman O'Rourke standing there. So that was so I went in with, we went in together. So all of a sudden this whole problem about how I could never get in to see him after 1 o'clock, that went away. And I think that's generally the way they've treated the press. There's been a number of reporters who have gone down to try to see Emilio. Eddie's been able to get some of them in the same process, but it's always a little cumbersome. Oh, we got to, they'll say we've got to do a count and stuff like that. Like you have to count prisoners. Well, really? It's inconvenient. They've made it inconvenient for media that way. But I wanted to say a couple of quick things other. Eddie and I met with, and along with Congressman O'Rourke, met with ICE officials while we were there in the El Paso detention. and we begged for Emilio's release and before Christmas, and they wouldn't do it. And in the meeting, we were making our case that at that time he had a temporary stay. He may have a permanent stay. That's usually what happens when you have a temporary stay. And so why not release him? Because there's a lot of people that have that classification that are released. And he's done nothing wrong, and he's played by the rules, and he's not a criminal. Well, it got a little heated in there, and we were told by the ICE lead attorney, I think he was addressing it maybe to Eddie or maybe to me, but we were both sort of talking pretty fast.
I think to both.
Yeah, both of us. He said, you guys should tone it down in the meeting. So the government of the United States telling us, tone it down. Basically, I'll interpret that for you. Don't exercise your First Amendment rights here in the United States of America. So, I told him we are not in a business of toning it down. We're here to make as much noise as we can and make sure everybody knows this guy's name, knows he's a journalist, and knows you're holding him. So, again, they knew we had a news conference at 1 o'clock, and the message to us was tone it down, right? So we walked out of the cell, the meeting, and we ran into a guy named Julian Aguilar, who's an outstanding border issues reporter for the Texas Tribune. So he asked us what happened in the meeting, and we were telling him stuff, and I said, well, and at some point they told us to just tone it down. And so he was writing a story, and he called the ICE officials, and he said, you asked these guys to, tone it down in the meeting? So they didn't say anything at first, and that's typical ICE, like no statement, they don't, no comment. So then a little bit later, as he's getting closer to his publication time, they put out a statement. Oh my God, ICE doesn't put out a statement about anything, right? They put out a statement denying that they told us to tone it down, right? But, I mean, okay, if they didn't tell us that, then why did we say we're not in the business of toning it down? And, I mean, they did it, and the congressman heard him do it. So, they don't directly work for the congressman, but in the food chain, congressman's a pretty important guy. So it's pretty breathtaking that they're willing in front of a congressman in the United States to say, tone it down, and then deny to a reporter trying to keep it out of his copy, printed anyway, to say, tone it down. So that was really interesting to me, and this part I need help with from Eddie, and maybe not. This one is not about the press so much, but I think the bishop had a hard time getting in there too, right? You had to go
so they gave me the runaround. I did all the paperwork, and then he was scheduled to go on a Saturday, and then when I called in, they said, "Oh, okay, you go ahead and go forward with the visit, and call me back in 10 minutes." And they never answered their phone. I called them for like 2-3 hours straight, and I finally gave up. And then I just had to reprogram everything to the following week, and then they were saying, "Oh, well, Saturdays is not a day that he should be coming. It's supposed to be like on visitation." And I'm like, "Well, this is not a regular visitation. This is the bishop. It should be treated like an attorney visit, a contact room." And they gave me the runaround, but we finally were able to do it. And I would add that during our meeting, I was shocked that I guess the bishop didn't know that he couldn't take his phone in there, so his phone went off, and he quiets it down. He lowers down the volume, and then two guards go in there and start yelling and saying, "Sir, you need to step out and can't have a phone." And I thought, this is the bishop you're talking to, and I was shocked. But they showed their true colors. They didn't respect his office. So, I would have probably said, I would have been a little bit more diplomatic and said, "Sir, with all due respect, there's some," but they weren't. They went in there. They were like listening and spying on our conversation, and they basically they threw out the bishop and told him he had to put his phone away, or else he had to leave the premises.
Yeah.
So that happened.
Yeah.
It just shows you what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, they told me to put my phone away too. But I mean, you're not supposed to have it in there, to be honest. But
yeah, you shouldn't.
But the one second. But the thing I want to just tie this together is that with the bishop comes the press, right? So Eddie walks out of lockup, goes to the front of detention, goes past the bars, and there's, you know, Channel 7, Channel 9, El Paso paper, you know, 3 or 4 other media that are there. So when they're being disrespectful, screwing around with the schedules, excuse me, pardon me, of the bishop, you know, trying to get into the lockup, it's about press because they don't want media coverage of this. It's not, so they go to that extent to be disrespectful of a religious leader, but really it's all, you can tie it together. There's 4 or 5 things you can look at where they're throwing sharp elbows because it's the press. And so you have to ask yourself, what is going on here about this guy? And they let 30 people out the week before, but they won't let him out for Christmas. This feels like this is about this guy. And this feels like this is about this guy who is symbolic of the press in Mexico and is making a lot of noise about, on free speech issues here in the United States. I think that's what we wanted to say. I love it that the first thing that our new president does is comes here and meets with you and talks about she's going to carry it forward for 110 who started this stuff. And you know, we're the worst nightmare of the El Paso Detention Center.
That's right.
And
Hey,
proudly
Kathy,
so.
can you
So
hear me?
I think we have questions. Anybody on the line want to say anything before we go to questions?
It's Kathy. I just had one thing I wanted to add. I think you're hearing a lot of exasperation here, and one of the reasons to underscore what Bill just said and to also elaborate a little bit on what I think Eddie said about the effort to, what we think is an effort to break Emilio's spirit. That exact thing happened earlier this year with another Mexican reporter whose case we also were monitoring, Martin Mendez, who also came here under threat, a young man, sought asylum, very openly came in through the port of entry, asked for asylum. In his case, ICE found that he had credible fear of returning to Mexico, but would not release him and kept him in jail under such duress that he eventually gave up and fled and went back home and is now living in hiding under the protection of Reporters Without Borders. So this is the second Mexican journalist this year whom our government seems to be trying to hound back into danger.
Kathy, thank you. And thanks for that reference to Reporters Without Borders. I want to take this opportunity to point out we do have a representative from Reporters Without Borders here, also from where? Margot. Margot, hi.
Thank you guys for everything you've been doing.
Can somebody give her a mic? Thank you.
I just want to say thank you so much to the National Press Club, everyone who's been involved on Emilio's case, and the media attention that you were to bring to Emilio and his son in detention, also the growth in the number of petition signatures. I think you guys have done a phenomenal job, but let's keep at it. Let's not give up. Everyone in this room, if you know journalists who are on TV, who have big platforms, big networks, if you can encourage them to go out and bother ICE at the detention center, I really think that will just kick them and really turn up the pressure. So if anybody's in a capacity to do that, I try to reach out to those journalists on a regular basis, but I think that's what we should be focusing on and not let up at all. So thank you guys all so much.
Oh, super. Thank you very much. We also have, I believe, somebody here representing the Committee to Protect Journalists. So thank you for being here today.
You want to say something? Okay.
No. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Just a reminder to those of you on the webcast, if you have a question, please send it to lunderwood@press.org. For those of you here in the room, when you take the mic, please do identify yourself and your news organization. And just as a reminder, we have Kathy Kiley, the National Press Club Journalism Institute's Press Freedom Fellow, on the phone, along with Eduardo Beckett, who is Emilio's attorney on this case. And I know we have one question over here, then we have another over there. Pat Host.
Hi, I'm Pat Host. I have two questions.
And you are with?
I'm a reporter with Jane's.
Yes.
I have two questions. Is there an opportunity for him to go to a third country? And also, has he had the opportunity to post a cash bond? Within the criminal justice system, most violent criminals get an opportunity to post a cash bond, and he is neither violent nor criminal. Does he get this opportunity? Why or why not?
This is Ed. Do you want me to answer
go ahead,
that?
Eddie. No, you go on the. Can you go on the bond, please?
Yeah. Yeah. So on the, this is the ironic thing about the law. The way Congress wrote it up, the way Emilio came in, right? It's legally, right? He went to the port of entry, turned himself in. He says, "I seek asylum." By doing that, the law itself says that he's not eligible for a bond before an immigration judge. He has no right to seek a bond, no right to file a petition for a bond. So he has no right to a bond whatsoever from the judge. However, ICE on its own can grant him a bond, release him on reconnaissance, under supervision, under humanitarian parole, or on an ankle bracelet. Of course, in this case, they have refused to do so, and that's the issue with these cases, is that the laws are very harsh, the way they were written, and unlike like you mentioned in federal court, you'll get bail. If you prove that you're not a flight risk and you're not a danger, you can go before the magistrate, federal judge, and most likely you would get a bond. But in this case, the law doesn't allow you to get one, and that's what makes this whole process very unfair. And there's not really a meaningful review of your circumstances, because basically ICE just looks at your, whatever you submit to them, and then, sometimes they don't even read it, and then they just check off a box saying denied, because I don't like you. You're a flight risk, and so does that answer your question?
On the bond, I think that's good.
Yeah, I can answer the question on the third country. Okay, we have considered that as an option because it is so dangerous for Emilio in Mexico. He has been told since he has been living in the United States that if he returns, he will be killed. So when things looked very dark for Emilio, we began to explore that option in conjunction with the Reporters Without Borders, and we explored the possibility of him going to another country in Latin America. The problem, he's really caught in a Kafkaesque situation here, which is that because of the circumstances under which he left Mexico, he fled, and because he's been in the United States so long, because our immigration laws move very slowly, he has no valid passport. So the problem is that he would be deported by the United States to Mexico. We even had people ready to accompany him to Mexico and get him on an airplane, but then we realized we couldn't do that because he wouldn't be allowed on the plane. He has no valid passport. So it's really a bureaucratic nightmare, and it's something worthy of Franz Kafka.
But so, Eddie, could the United States not step up and say, oh, we see the problem, we see that if we deport him, he's at risk of being killed. We understand he doesn't have a passport. We understand he's Mexican, but instead of deporting him, we're going to let him go to this third country. Why can't the United States government do that?
I guess it can be done, but it has to be negotiated with the third safe country, and then the third safe country has to accept him, and that's the issue. In most cases that I've seen, third safe countries never accept you. In this case, though, I think it can be at the highest levels. I mean, it can be done. Of course, and I'm not familiar with the procedures. It's way beyond my scope. I do know that one of the things that we were thinking about is filing a petition before the Inter-American Commission, which is a human rights organization, which is in D.C. And my understanding is through them, you can move it through the United Nations and have them go to a safe third country, but you have to exhaust all your remedies. And so for us, we're not ready to do that because we haven't exhausted. We have a case before the Board of Immigration Appeals. If we lose there, we have the circuit courts, and from there the Supreme Court. So that is always an option, but it's just not an option like as of right now.
So
and for everything that Kathy says, I agree with her too. It is a logistical nightmare.
Can you just tell us what happens with the BIA? What happens next, and how long is this going to take till we know the next?
Yeah, so So there was a U.S. Supreme Court case, I believe back in 2003, where the Solicitor General made representations to the U.S. Supreme Court justices that, on average, the Board of Immigration Appeals takes about 5 months to adjudicate an appeal. It turns out that that the numbers that they were using were false and they were wrong. And like in 2016, the Solicitor or Acting Solicitor General had to send a letter to the Supreme Court saying, "Sorry, we gave you wrong information. We won our case based on this information. However, it takes longer than that, and it can take on average up to 282 days." So, but the process basically is there's no more courts. Everything's reviewed on paper. So this is a paper review. So they'll do a full review of the case. They'll look at the transcripts. They'll look at the evidence that was presented, and then they'll ask me to file a brief, and the government will file their brief. And then once they look at all that, they'll make a new decision. 3 things could happen. 1, they grant them the asylum, which the BIA has the authority to do. Most of the time, they remand the case and say, we didn't like the judge's decision. You were wrong, and you should redo the case. They remand it back. And then the third option would be to agree with the judge and say, we agree with you, and we affirm it. And then at that point, you have like 30 days to file like a stay or removal with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and a motion to reopen or an appeal, a direct appeal with the Fifth Circuit.
So it could be 200 days while he's in the detention, while he's waiting to hear.
Yeah,
from
and I would tell you, I have so many clients that are detained. I have clients right now that have been detained over a year. So it could be indefinite, and that's another issue too. With the Supreme Court right now, there's a case right now on that very issue saying if someone comes legally, no criminal history, and they seek asylum, why are we detaining them for so long? That's the precise issue before the Supreme Court. They haven't ruled on it. The briefs have been submitted. Oral arguments have been taken. So one of the remedies would be to file what we call a 2241 writ of habeas action. And in this case, since he's only been detained since December 7th, it might be too premature, but we are contemplating that maybe he had been detained, back in 2008. If we can use those 7 months that he was detained plus the time that he has now, maybe we can make a credible argument that he's been detained for too long. But usually, you have to wait 6 months before you're ever able to file a legitimate habeas petition before the federal court.
I'd just like to interrupt to make clear what the timeline is here and to really underscore what we've put this man through. He came into this country legally in 2008 requesting asylum. He was detained after he requested asylum for 9 months, during which he was separated from his son, who was 15 years old. I'd like all the parents in the room to think about how they would deal with that, knowing that the only thing you did to deserve this was be a good reporter. He was ultimately let out on parole, I believe that's the appropriate term, Eddie, and lived in this country legally for 9 years until the immigration courts got around to dealing with his case and made what we believe to be a very wrong decision. That decision is also online for those of you who want to look at it. But now he's been detained again. So for doing nothing wrong and really put through, I think, an emotional and psychological ringer. And this is happening in the United States of America. So at least to me, it's pretty shocking. I thought I was a cynical journalist, but even I'm shocked.
Thanks, Kathy. We have a question over here from Justin.
Hi, Justin Russell with backroompolitics.org. Jeff wanted me to give my background, just on background, as somebody who's worked in migrant interdiction, border security enforcement, and national security items involving immigration enforcement. Got several questions and a comment. Number one, question for Eddie Beckett. Eddie, is he under a current detention and removal order, and when was that order issued?
Technically, there is a 1999 expedited removal order, but he complied with it, right? Because that was back in 1999. It was only for 5 years, and basically the law just says you cannot come back without the Attorney General's permission for 5 years. Well, he did that. He never came back. he came back in 2008 and he asked for asylum. Therefore, this deportation order automatically, when he applied for asylum and it was granted credible fear, it basically goes away. It's not relevant anymore. You can't use it against him because he entered legally. Had he come illegally, then of course they can reinstate it. Does that answer your question?
People don't know what credible fear is. Can you explain that?
Oh, sure. So the credible fear process, right? So the exception, so if you're deported from the United States at any time, you're basically banned, right, for the amount of time, unless you get a waiver or you get the permission from the Attorney General, and that means, whether CBP, CIS, or ICE. And so the exception to that is credible fear. If you go to the port of entry, says, I have fear, and they interview you, and the officer finds you credible, then they cannot reinstate that order anymore because it basically overrides it. So in my legal opinion, this expedited removal order from 1999 has no relevance to his case whatsoever. It has never been used against him. It was brought up during the removal proceedings. I mean, it was filed as part of the ICE's case, just as an exhibit, but it was not, they didn't bring it up, they didn't ask questions on it, they didn't try to say we're going to reinstate you, nothing like that. Because legally speaking, they can't. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, another question is, the one organization that I've not heard brought up right now is the actual, ICE is an enforcement agency. They
Correct.
are tasked to enforce the detention and removal order. The question is, why have we not heard from Director Cisna, the Director of Citizen and Immigration Services, which is the organization that takes the application for political asylum and makes the adjudication for political asylum in consult with the State Department?
Well, I can answer that.
Go ahead.
So basically, right, when you seek asylum, there's two ways to do it, right? One is if you enter illegally and you don't get caught, and you're able to file an application directly with the United States Immigration Services, USCIS, then that goes directly to the Houston Asylum Office. So it depends where you live at, right? Because there's the San Francisco Asylum Office, Houston, and Virginia. So depending on where you live at, and you can go that route, which is a non-adversarial route. In this case, when Emilio went to the port of entry, he was immediately sent before an immigration judge. Therefore, once the judge has jurisdiction, then CIS no longer has jurisdiction, and everything has to be done through the judge. Of course, I'll tell you in this case that one thing that I forgot to mention, that during the proceedings in this case, Immigration Customs Enforcement attorneys actually filed a motion to terminate the immigration proceedings of Emilio to give him the opportunity to file his asylum directly with the United States Immigration Services in a non-adversarial manner, which is very beneficial to him, right? Because, it's just him telling his story, and if the asylum officer says, I believe you, you're credible, I'm going to grant you your asylum, and that's it. In this case, it's before an immigration judge. It's a very adversarial system. You can object to evidence. Your credibility is on the line. So Immigration Customs Enforcement thought that Emilio was a stand-up guy, that they were willing to bat for him, and they filed this motion, but the judge denied it. And so that's a very interesting fact that raises alarms for me, is that ICE was willing to terminate the proceedings, and then all of a sudden they're bringing up, the stuff from 1999 when they knew this all along.
I think you have to give the timing there. So when ICE asked to...
yeah, that would be subsequent to 2008.
So this is a different administration.
Yeah, so this would have been like 2016, I believe, when they filed a motion to terminate.
Yeah.
And they had permission, from the ICE headquarters in Washington, D.C., who signed off on it and said, yeah, you should. That guy shouldn't even be before a judge. That guy is credible. He should be allowed to go forward with a non-adversarial system.
And last question real quick is, it sounds like ICE is using in the enforcement of its order as evidence, or I'm sorry, EOIR and the Executive Office of Immigration Courts is using as evidence a document against Emilio from the port of entry into the U.S. Has anybody talked to Customs and Border Protection Office of Field Operations about this and gotten their statement, which might help Emilio?
No, I mean, it's so old, 1999. I doubt that the CBP officer is still around. And actually, it's not EOIR who's bringing this up, right? It's not the Executive Office of Immigration Review, the court. It's ICE directly, the ICE director saying, you know, I'm going to use this 1999 expedited removal order to basically characterize Emilio as trying to commit some kind of fraud. And there was no fraud. It was just basically an officer saying, I believe you're violating the terms of your border crossing card, and I'm going to send you back because I don't think, you know, I don't believe you. That's all that happened. So we go from that to fraud. You know, it's a leap in logic. But it's ICE who's using this, and not the executive. Well, I mean, they're both executive, but I'm talking about the immigration court. And so one of the things that we could do, though, we could, you know, reach out to CBP, but I doubt that officer's still around, and that's what makes this order unreliable, right? Because the officer's not around for cross-examination. It wasn't done in the proper language. Emilio is basically saying a lot of the stuff is not even true, even though I signed off on it. But it wasn't done in the Spanish language. So it's a very unreliable, questionable document.
Yeah, sure, Margot. Do we have a mic for Margot?
Just going back to the State Department, I want to say that both RSF and CPJ have engaged with the Department of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor on Emilio's case. So we are providing them with appropriate information that they need on his history as a journalist and his history of coming in requesting asylum in the U.S. to hope that they can also know about his case and help in whatever way that they can.
Have you received any response from them on the information that you've provided them?
They've engaged with us, asked for details, which I interpret as a good sign, but I have not seen anything public yet. But I know that the contacts that we're working with are definitely willing to talk to us about the case, which makes us much more hopeful in terms of when you compare with ICE, where we've never really been able to engage in a dialogue with them.
That's really great to know. Thank you.
I would just want to add something. In regards to the regulation about the State Department, there was a time where the judges, by regulation, had to send a copy of the asylum application to the State Department so they could review it, and then they would issue an opinion or a report. That regulation was, basically retracted, and so now it's optional, and most of the judges are not doing that because they don't have to anymore. Before they were forced to do it, now they don't have to. So the judges are not sending the applications to the State Department to get an opinion anymore that I know of.
Yeah, and this is Kathy. I'd like to say that this conversation raises another, really vexing issue about this case for us, which is this is in the hands of immigration enforcement, which, as one of the questioners just said, they have a job to do. But really, it has nothing to do with this case. Emilio is not an illegal immigrant. He is an asylum seeker whose asylum case is deeply intertwined with free speech issues, which is something our country values and tries to encourage. So I think this notion of bringing some other governmental perspective to bear on this, which is incidentally something we've been trying to do by getting congressional engagement here. And it's interesting that all of these really, I would view them as incremental attempts at character assassination. First telling a congressman that, oh, Emilio is not really a journalist, and then saying, oh, well, see, he's committed this crime at the border. All of these things, which we can knock down, seem to be efforts to prevent the kind of checks and balances that our government is supposed to have. And I think in this case, this is a case that should not be viewed as an immigration case. This is a freedom of the press case, and that is why you see so many press organizations involved and working really hard on this case.
Kathy, that's a really good point. Thank you. Thanks for making it, yeah.
I wanted to say one quick thing, if I can, about there's a Republican Congressman Pierce of New Mexico who represents the district where Emilio lived, and he has very his district is a Latino district, and he's got good makes good effort to make outreach to the Hispanic community. And he has a strong team involved in immigration issues in his office as well. And their public position is that they know this case. They know about it. They haven't said anything about it. But they also have requested the file on this case from ICE so that the immigration team can brief the congressman so that the congressman can formulate a public position and maybe speak out about it. I haven't heard from him in a couple of days, but the last time I talked to him, and I checked right before this, but I haven't heard from him back yet, they have not received the file from ICE. So here's a member of Congress. He's in the majority party. He's interested in the issues. He's asking for the file. And what they're saying is they haven't received the information. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of things yet to come here as some of these things fall in line. We have two really great editorials out there. If you haven't read them, one from the Washington Post, one from the Houston Chronicle. There's a lot of papers that I expect will start writing editorials about this as well. Some Texas papers and some other papers that are interested in this issue. So there's a lot more to go here. And if people are looking for something to do besides sign the petition, as Margot says, tweet about it, make a lot of noise on social media, but also start thinking about who you can talk to that is maybe likely to write an editorial about this, because it's a complicated issue. It's hard for News of Day, but it's a good story for an editorial page.
That's a good point. We can take one final question from the audience here.
This is to the attorney. Do you have an address of the detention center where we can send Emilio letters of support, and can he receive them?
Yes. The address at the detention center is at 8915 Montana, El Paso, Texas 79925, and then you would address it to him with his A number, and then the facility is called the El Paso Processing Center.
Sorry, we didn't hear that very well. Could you?
Okay.
Breaking
So
up a
I'll
little
start
bit.
from the beginning. Yeah, so you would address it directly to him, right? Emilio Gutierrez Soto, and then you would put his A number, which stands for alien number, which is 077-491-780. If you don't put that number in there, he'll never get it. And then you would put El Paso Processing Center, 8915 Montana, El Paso, Texas 79925.
Montana, like the state, Montana.
Like the state, yeah. Montana Avenue.
I think that's right.
I mean, you could do it that way, or you can send them to me, and I could take it to them. Whatever works for you.
Eddie, can I just repeat that A number again? That's 077-490-0780. Is that correct?
No, it's 077.
Yep.
491.
Okay.
780.
780. So one more time, 077-491-780, and that's Montana Avenue, Street, just Montana?
Yeah, Avenue.
Avenue. All right, great.
Or Street. I think it's Street. Yeah, Street.
Okay. All right. Kathy or Eddie, do either of you have any final closing comments before we thank members of the press for attending today?
No, just thanks Bill McCarran and Kathy and all of you for the great work you're doing. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Putting Eddie Beckett on the list of heroes of El Paso. He's doing this case pro bono, and he's obviously super committed to his client.
Great.
Good?
Yep.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you for joining us here today. This is an important topic, and we are so glad that you made time to hear us out on it. Thank you.